All right, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, we're going to be doing the fiqh of divorce. So lots of details to discuss, inshallah. But of course, I want to, inshallah, do it into two portions. So the first one, just going over really quick, we were talking about the fiqh of divorce last time. And in the fiqh of divorce, of course, certainly we talked about the different types of divorce. We talked about divorcing in three together. We talked about in divorcing and going back on the divorce. And we said that that divorce is when the husband would initiate the marriage resolution, and the khulu' is when the wife would initiate it, and each one basically has a different, just call it protocol, to in order for it to be well, whether valid or whether we're talking about a certain process in what actually happens there. So we went in some details about what is called the talaq al-raj'i, which is the revocable divorce. And we said the revocable divorce would be in a situation where the husband basically divorced, whether the first divorce or the second divorce, and is within the waiting period. Then we went in details about the different types of marriages and situations. If we're speaking about an irrevocable divorce, that would be different because that would be there is a minor irrevocable divorce and there is a major irrevocable divorce. The difference between the minor and the major irrevocable divorce, the minor would be in the first and second divorce and after the waiting period finishes. That's when, of course, it would be a minor irrevocable divorce since it's in the first and the second one, but after the waiting period had finished. Yet the major irrevocable divorce, the husband cannot bring his wife back until she remarries without prior agreement. Now, in the major irrevocable divorce or the minor revocable or irrevocable divorce, certainly there's the iddah. Okay, but then there are different regulations in terms of does she have nafaqah, does she not have nafaqah, for how long, etc. So then we went in details with some of that. And we also talked about some of the things about the differences, and we went in details with the iddah. And with the iddah, we said it's a waiting period. If she basically menstruates, it would be for 3 cycles. If she doesn't menstruate, it would be for 3 months. And if basically she is pregnant until she would get her baby. So that would basically summarize some of what we had done in regards to iddah. No need to go back to all of them, but certainly iddah is extremely important to discuss because it is going to define basically whether the marriage bond still exists or whether the husband may take his wife back with a new contract or without a new contract, or what really happens. And certainly in an irrevocable divorce, the situation is, yes, there will be iddah, but no return is allowed. The marriage bond basically got terminated. And of course, some rights may still be applicable in terms of things like alimony, but the alimony does not stay forever. It basically stays just during the iddah. And of course, we said iddah is mandatory, and certainly the length it varies by the circumstances that we had mentioned. And we basically got you this little cute picture right there to help you see and understand where and what iddah, and of course, certainly, the in order to summarize it to make it easy. The other part about going back on the talaq, certainly in the first and the second divorce, then we left off at this one. So if he wanted to reverse this, and basically right there, I actually have each and every single slide, a translation for it right after it, but I'm going to be using the Arabi one really quick, just so that, and then I'll explain it in just a bit. So how to reverse a revocable divorce. Again, what's a revocable divorce? الطلاق الرجعي, that's in the first and the second divorce. Let's say, let's give a scenario, makes it easy for us to actually visualize it. Let's say the husband divorced his wife in the first divorce, and then he regretted. Does the divorce actually apply? Yes, the divorce does apply, even if he had regretted. But if he wanted to return the wife within the waiting period time frame, he can actually do that. The question is how. Okay, so there is one way of basically doing it verbally, saying something like irtajatuki or rajatuki, I'm bringing you back, etc. But here's the thing. Is it enough to tell the wife, Rajatuki, or I'm bringing you back, or let's come back? Does it have to be in that, that explicit in this exact word? It doesn't have to be this exact word, but it can be done in your language and basically giving the same meaning that, I regret this, or it doesn't have to say, I regret this, let's come back to each other. We're going to come back. Let's put these pieces together and basically do it in this way. Now, does there have to be a witness? So, for example, calling her brother up and saying, "Hey, I'm bringing your sister back to basically to this marriage. Just letting you know, just that short, or perhaps maybe sending a text message and bring your sister back, etc." Now, the second one is rather controversial. Let's keep that one in mind. Why is it controversial? The second one is basically saying, well, through action, and this is talking about what kind of an action? Something like sexual intercourse. So he's basically being intimate with her, and certainly, wait a minute, I thought you had divorced your wife, but of course they would get angry with one another, and then it ends up basically going there and they basically get intimate. Is that considered as bringing the wife back or not? This is a very big debate between scholars. Some scholars actually said, yes, it is bringing her back if he had the intention to treat her like a wife and just basically get the situation back to its normal situation. And in other words, basically regretting the divorce, let's live. And of course, if you're being intimate, there's nothing more to living a marriage and husband and wife more than intimacy. But some scholars actually said not necessarily. The relationship is not zina per se, and if he still intends to continue this divorce, then that would be exactly like when we talked about the talaq al-bid'i. It wouldn't be a talaq bid'i because the talaq already happened. But it would be inflicting harm on her because he's basically making that iddah prolonged. Okay, so that's the problem with this. But if he did have the intention that this intimacy would be in order to bring back the relation, then that would be, according to some scholars, a considerable action to bring about the relationship between them and to bring about basically this revocable divorce to be basically right there considered as bringing back and reversing this divorce. But you want to keep in mind the divorce is still counted. If we're talking about the first, even if he was to be intimate or he says rajatuki, it is still counted. You got two more to go. Okay. Now, the other part is the documentation. If, for example, he would basically say, I'm going to document this, I'm going to bring two witnesses and let them know that I'm going to basically bring back my wife. And certainly he goes to, let's say, two people and, says, I'm going to go to the court. I want you to be witnesses that I'm there. Wait a minute. So why is he even doing that? Let's just say, and it happens a lot of times, it's not right, but it does happen. What is it? So the wife is angry, and well, so is the husband. But then he knew that because he initiated the divorce, and she basically goes to her, I don't know, parents' house, and she's so angry, and they get into this dispute. You scared her, you did this, all these different things. And then he would probably want to defend himself that that's not true. She's lying about it. And by the way, I know this is going to sound very, very offensive to some, but studies actually say that the higher testosterone, mm, people are more likely to be honest. Yeah, I know. What are you saying? Sorry, ladies, I'm not saying you're liars, okay? But we're just saying that there's an association between perhaps fear and not feeling safe, or perhaps maybe afraid to say the truth and really face things directly, in between, I guess, sometimes twisting the information. Let's just use twisting the information. I'm not lying about the information, okay? Twisting the information, twisting the narrative, because we're afraid to be indicted or to be seen as guilty. So we basically twist the information. And sorry, ladies, this is more common in women than men. Why? Maybe because we're afraid. Maybe because you listed the reasons yourself. But I know there's this study that's quite interesting, that they even put testosterone even in men, and the men that had higher testosterone basically were found speaking and being truthful. Doesn't mean they're always truthful, but yeah, they were more truthful than the men with the less testosterone. And certainly, as women, we also have testosterone, but not as much as men. Anyhow, regardless. So she basically goes to her family's house, is insisting that no, it's his fault. He said this, and basically, I guess, twisted the facts. But anyhow, the husband realizes that, hey, listen, I've got 5 kids right here. And he called her parents up, but her parents are insisting, no, you harmed our daughter. And her family basically took the narrative that their daughter had basically said, and they felt that it is incumbent upon them to defend their daughter. But then the husband, he basically considered that, I know her family is not knowing all the information. I've got 5 kids involved here. You know what? Even if she doesn't come along, even if she doesn't know about this, I'm going to go to court myself, and I'm going to tell the qadi right there that I'm bringing back my wife. 2 witnesses right there. And they said, yeah, he did do that divorce. He admits it. And right there, he wants to say, before the iddah finishes, I'm bringing back my wife. Okay. So now, even though she's at her family's house, but she's actually still considered married to him by that documentation. So just to keep in mind, but she's not accepting. She is not consenting. 2 things happened in this scenario. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن. She was not supposed to leave the marriage household, period. إلا يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. Unless they had committed a real fahisha like cheating and she was caught red-handed in that situation, that's a different story. Or unless she was completely feeling unsafe, not faking the lack of safety and the lack of security. Oh, he started yelling at me and I wasn't feeling safe. It's like, really? Was it that scary? Was it, all of that? Maybe you should have just maybe went to your room and just closed the door just until you guys would relax, and maybe just give him time to relax. Didn't really need that you would completely leave the household. So in general, she's not supposed to be leaving the marriage household unless of a serious matter. Like we said, we're speaking about complete danger. We're talking about danger, or we're talking about perhaps maybe like cheating, God forbid. Okay, now that's number one. Number two is that the ayah was really clear. لا تخرجوهن. He doesn't have the right to tell her, you know what? I don't want you staying here. Get out of my house. He doesn't have the right to say that. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called this household as her household, not yours. ولا يخرجن. And they would not go out إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. So therefore cannot leave. So she should not leave, even if she consents to it, and he should not basically get her out either. And but let's just say it happened. So that was the first mistake that she had committed. The second mistake is that thinking that, you know what, I'm going to do whatever it takes to pressure. Guess what? If you're going to do whatever it takes to pressure, now you're actually going outside of this circumstance and having your rights to right now losing your rights because you're going to be called nashes. Yeah. Now it's going to be called nashes, and in the situation of nashes, you basically lost your rights to ask for things like alimony and nafaqa, and certainly a lot of your rights are right now not going to be your rights anymore, specifically financial rights, because you decided to basically do what is called nushuz. You decided not to come back. Okay, and for Anesh's, she doesn't have the right to actually get the nafaqa right there, just a note. Okay, now the other thing is that, of course, if she still insists that no, I'm not going to come back, he hurt me so much, all of these different things, then in that situation, if she insists, then let's say she says, you know what, I want this, and this is very often happening, okay, is that she would insist that no, I want a divorce, etc. Then in that situation, guess what? You are actually asking for khulu, not a divorce anymore. Because a divorce, if it's in the revocable area or the revocable time, then لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن إلا يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. Does that include child support that she loses? Absolutely not. Never, 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 never does she ever lose the child support, because that's not her rights. That's the child's rights. Okay, so in order for the revocable divorce to be valid, what and when does it happen? There are certain times that there are conditions that must be there. Number one, it must be in a revocable divorce and not in an irrevocable divorce. So let's say he said anti taliq after the waiting period had been finished after the first divorce, and there was no new marriage contract. Well, the waiting period finished. She's not your wife anymore. Unless you make a new marriage contract and she consents. During the waiting period of a revocable divorce, her consent does not matter. The marriage is still valid. Let's say this again. In a revocable divorce, her consent does not matter because he was the one that initiated the divorce. So it was him that basically had said the divorce, not her, and therefore her consent to accepting or not accepting to come back is not here considered. When does her consent make a difference? When the iddah finishes in the first or a second divorce, that's when her consent makes a difference. After the iddah finishes, and then let's say the husband regret this and he wants to bring her back. And she says, sorry, I don't want to. You really hurt me. And that's it. I don't want to come back. Then in this irrevocable timing, she has the right to say that. No consent, sorry. I'll give you mahr. How much? 3 times what I had given you before. Right now the gold has gone up to 4.8 basically the every ounce. Maybe that's a good idea. Let me think about it. Well, she starts thinking about it, and then along comes another good candidate. And then basically he comes over and he says, you know what? he was basically a better candidate than her ex now. So then she can actually get a proposal too and get married to somebody else. Okay, now the second one, of course, the second condition is that it must be a valid or a legal waiting period. So we're talking about 3 menstrual cycles or 3 months. That's what we're speaking about right now. So it must be within that time frame. And the third condition is that he must be clear, explicit in his intention to take her back and not wary about it. There must be, of course, no reason to bring her back, such as, let me give you an example of some of those things that would be an impediment preventing him from being able to bring her back. Let's just say, okay, let's say it was the qadi ordering the separation between the two, then sorry, even though she's during the waiting period, but the qadi gave the order, you don't have the power, the authority to bring her back. Now, I want to go back to this question. If we're speaking about that part about, is it permissible to be intimate in an irrevocable divorce? Sorry, in a revocable, not an irrevocable, irrevocable for sure, no, but in a revocable divorce. And would it be considered as coming back or not? And I said before that that's that debate between scholars. Wanted to note those scholars and really help you see right there, so the first view basically says that the position of the Hanafis and the Hanbalis, they basically said she returns to him just by intercourse alone. So even if he were to be intimate with her, that's enough to basically get her back into this relationship. And therefore, that would be considered as a way of ending the revocable divorce, basically. Okay, well, I shouldn't say ending it, but I should say terminating at least that revocable divorce, but it would still be counted. The second view basically said, well, no, just by intimacy, that doesn't mean that she is returned to him unless he had the intention to basically bring her back through this action. That was the position of the Malikis. The third view, they basically said she doesn't return to him just by being intimate, and rather he has to be explicit verbally to actually say, I'm returning you, and just by doing a certain action, that's not enough. I'll say another thing that you had some scholars actually say things like, even if you were to say, can you put me some breakfast, or probably sat together on the porch and started drinking coffee together, that's enough. Some scholars actually went that far and they said, well, it's like, here it is. They're right now, happily ever after, I hope. Okay, right now coming back together by action. They're drinking coffee together and they're just, how it happens between husband and wife. We get angry with each other and then as if nothing had happened. As if nothing had happened, and then we start bumping into each other's shoulders, sometimes on purpose, as if nothing had happened, and as if we're angry. But then, of course, it's to provoke the other side that I'm basically right there, trying to tease and not tease and whatever. Okay, now, so this basically brings an end to discussing the different things about talaq, which is what the husband would basically initiate. I thought it would be a good idea to also do a what about the wife and her initiating the divorce? What would that look like, and what does it mean, and what are the implications? So let's look at some of the things. Number one is al-khulu', is basically what the wife would actually initiate in basically in a separation, but on a condition that she's basically compensating the husband for whatever he had basically paid for. So we're talking about a mahar, and she's basically compensating the mahar and giving it back to the husband. So what's the evidence on this? Well, the evidence is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ أَن تَأْخُذُوا مِمَّا آتَيْتُمُوهُنَّ شَيْئًا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيما حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به. Very clear, crystal clear ayah that there is no sin, or لا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما أتيتموهن شيئا. It is not permissible for you to take anything of what you had given them, unless you feared that they would not live up to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in that situation, if you feared that, then in that situation, it would be permissible that they would compensate for basically seeking a divorce. So in other words, this this, just the small sentence right there, is basically the evidence to prove that khulu' is permissible. Let me just say on a side, unfortunately, right now, very few courts would actually take khulu' as something that is considerable and basically a woman's right, but we definitely need to bring back a lot of the Sharia right there. Okay, the other evidence is that this hadith. Let's see what happened. So the wife of Thabit ibn Qais. Now, one thing, let me just tell you a small story about Thabit ibn Qais. Thabit ibn Qais was a guy that really had a very loud voice tone. He was rather very short compared to other men. So his wife, Fatima, she basically gets married to Thabit, of course, but then Fatima realizes when she was looking at her husband compared to when he was, I guess, walking with the other guys, and he was seeming rather shorter than the other men. She felt that that wasn't masculine. In another narration, Fatima felt that her husband had an ugly appearance. But one thing is that Thabit ibn Qais was actually a Sahabi that the Prophet ﷺ had even mentioned that Thabitun fil Jannah. When the ayah was revealed, when the ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. This ayah was basically speaking to the Sahaba when they would be calling on to the Prophet ﷺ, talking to the Prophet ﷺ, that they should have the adab of how they speak with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is a red line because his position is holy. You cannot be calling the Prophet ﷺ like you would be calling any other friend. So, Thabit ibn Qais thought that this ayah was including him because he naturally had a loud voice. Who knows? Maybe he had a hearing problem, but everybody knew, and all the Sahaba knew that he had a problem with having a very loud voice. He thought that that was referring to him, so he basically stayed in his house, did not want to leave because he was afraid that that ayah was going to expose him as a munafiq. That's when the Prophet ﷺ calls on to him, there go the Sahaba trying to call him, but then he insists he didn't want to come back. And then once and second time and third time until they basically had said, well, he was afraid that that ayah that was last revealed in regards to the voice and having a high voice in front of you was actually referring to him. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Thabitun fil Jannah. Thabit is actually steadfast in Jannah. But despite all of that, Fatima, she basically goes to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, ثابت ibn Qais, لا أعيب عليه في خلق ولا دين. I have nothing to complain about, not in his mannerisms and not in his deen. He's got the best. ولكن أكره الكفر في الإسلام. But I would hate to be going back to kufr after being Muslim. Wait a minute. So she was afraid that she was going to leave the religion? No, 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 no. She wasn't afraid that she was going to leave the religion. This is a way when she had recognized that being a pious and a righteous wife, basically to the husband, is part of what would make you a mu'min. Yes, by serving your husband, by being a good wife to your husband, you're basically right there, part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَةُ الْغَيْبِ. You're being a salihah wife. Just by being a pious wife with your husband, just by being a righteous wife, etc., based on the principles of Allah. You're doing this not because of him alone, but you're doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. A salihah woman would basically be one, قانتة, حافظة للغيب, basically preserving her husband's privacies. Number two, basically right there, قانتات. قانتات, she obeys her husband. He tells her not to leave. Like, okay, I'm not going to be leaving. Don't go here, don't go there. She's like, okay, you don't want me to go there? Okay, fair enough. That's قانتة. حافظة للغيب بما حفظ الله. That's it. Anyhow, but she was feeling that she wasn't comfortable and she totally detested Thabit ibn Qais, and that's why she said, أكره الكفر في الإسلام. I would hate to be a kafir after, in other words, deny the rights of my husband after being Muslim. So she did not want to be. And this is in order to let us know that, ladies, if you are not a good wife, remember, the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith basically said, see your position with your husband, for he is your door to Jannah or your door to hellfire. That's so scary. So she recognized that, and that's why she came to the Prophet ﷺ. There is another hadith, or two other hadith. One is that she hated his facial appearance. Two is that she felt that he was too short for her and compared him with the other guys and felt that that wasn't masculine enough. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ tells him, أَتَرُدِّينَ عَلَيْهِ حَدِيقَتَهُ. Would you bring it and give him back his garden? What about the garden? What is the garden? So the garden was basically the garden that he had given to her as basically the mahr. And that was what was clarified in this, that he gave it to her as a mahr. She said, sure, I'll return it to him. So the Prophet ﷺ tells, look at this one, الله, tells Thabit ibn Qais, اقبل الحديقة وفارقها. Just accept the hadīqa and just basically separate with her. You could say this hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari. And this is one thing, is that you could say that when we're talking about al-khulu', does he have to accept the compensation? So let's say she said, you know what, I'm going to return the mahr to you, and I want you to basically, that's it, we're going to be separating. Does he have to accept, or does he not have to accept? We're going to get there. But right now, just to let you know, the Prophet ﷺ said, اقبل الحديقة. Scholars actually debated whether this takes effect in just the husband consenting to take the mahr, and this gets, I guess, let's just say he paid $20,000 in mahr, let's just assume, paid $20,000 in mahr, and her family basically say, you know what, let's sell him these $20,000 in mahr, and we're gonna get over with this because anyways, you know, we don't want to go through courts and going into all these different trials and trying to prove anything. We're sick and tired of this. Let's just end it right there. You know what? Will you accept that we return your mahr to you, that this would be a khulu and we would do that. And he said, I mean, yeah, sure, why not? Okay, whatever. Then right away, instantly, on the phone, on going to the app, basically return five because Zelle only takes 5,000 every single time. Okay, five. There we go, right there. $20,000 had been transferred into your account, and then okay, here we go. But then he said, "Well, I just said okay, I don't mind." But yeah, you just said, okay, I don't mind, and on the spot. And right instantly, they basically transferred the money into his account. Then in that situation, this takes and becomes active the second that everything was transferred into his account. Okay. Now, other scholars, they said, let's just assume that he said, okay. And then they tried to transfer the money into the account. There was something wrong with the app, or the app didn't want to transfer everything. And then he realized that, you know what? No, I don't want that. I've got 5 kids. Oh man, me getting remarried is going to cost me even more. Let's just assume. Okay. And then he decided that, no, yeah, I did say okay, but then no. And the money wasn't yet transferred. So that's that debate. Now, the other debate is, what if he says, no, I don't want to? But the wife insists and she says, but I want to. I'm going to give you your mahar and that's it. But then the qadi basically tells the husband, hey, she's going to be giving you back your mahar. And how about we end this relationship? She's going to be basically offering back the mahar and doing a khula. And he says, no, I don't want that. Then the qadi has two options. The qadi can, number one, do what is considered a talaq lid-darar if the wife was capable of proving that there was harm upon her. That's number one. Then the qadi will do what is called fasq. Number two, the qadi can say she's paying back the mahar, and here it is. You don't have the right to say no. And then the qadi will basically get involved. Other scholars, they refused this option, and they said the qadi does not have the right to force him to accept that mahar to be paid back, and the qadi does not have the power to basically force him to accept the khula. Okay, that's the other opinion. So opinion number one is that the khula, the compensation, is basically supposed to be mutually consented, that she says, I'll give you back your money. She says, okay, fine. And then that would be the ideal way. But then what if he says, no, I still don't want it. I don't want to do khula. Then majority of the scholars, they said he doesn't have the option if the qadi intervenes, and he can say, well, you want it or you don't. She is going to give you that mahar. And just like the Prophet ﷺ said, اقبل الحديقة وفارقها, and the Prophet ﷺ was acting on behalf of what a qadi would basically do, and the qadi would basically be acting on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ. اقبل الحديقة, you're going to have to accept it. You've got no option. And then that's it. فارقها, that's it. This is a separation basically conducted by the qadi himself, and that she would pay back her mahar. Okay, so this is, of course, that's why when you look at, can the person wali al-amr, basically the qadi, or even if we're talking about like an imam at the masjid, basically say, okay, you've got the mahar. Yes, I've got the mahar. All right, give me the mahar. And then the mahar would basically put in his office, and then he would basically call the man to his office and say, sir, your wife had actually initiated a khula. Here's the gold that you paid her, whatever, how many ounces of gold, whatever it is, here's your gold. Thank you, sir. Have a good day. Wait a minute. What just happened? Yes, your wife came over. Here's that. And then you're going to separate. Okay, now we're going to get into some of those and going into, of course, if the husband basically refuses, then certainly the divorce, the khulu does take place, of course, but it has to be done through court. So she cannot do and say, I don't know, I put the gold in, I guess, a shipping box and I shipped it to his house. And guess what? I got the trafficking numbers and everything, and it was UPS. It basically shipped it to his house, and there it is. The talaq is right now set, or the khulu is now set. No, 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 dear. This is to be done through a court process to make sure of that documentation. But I've got the documentation, the UPS trafficking, and it said shipped right there. And guess what? It even showed a picture of the gold basically put at his doorstep. We'll say, we're going to need to document this. This is not a sale to say, yeah, I've got the documentation that it basically took a photo of this box being at his home. This is not selling a piece of some kind of product or a good. This is a marriage. There's a process to it. There's a protocol to it. So we would basically need it to go through court, and the wife, of course, can file the lawsuit in court and basically with the qadi, and that's basically what would make that khulu' judgment, or the khulu' basically to happen when the qadi would announce that this does take place or not, and of course, even without the husband's consent. Let's just assume that the wife waived her financial rights. And she said, you know what? The wife basically, she said, I don't want any of those rights. And even with those mahar, all of that, and basically waived all of her rights in terms of nafaqah and so forth. What happens then? So then in that situation, of course, this is part of the process to end basically the financial rights that the husband owes her, and she basically had given up on them in return for the resolution of this marriage. So okay, so a number of different key points in regarding to this. So we're talking about number one is that the major role that the qadi, in order to make a khulu happen, the qadi is a key figure in the situation, especially if we're speaking about a khulu, okay, a khulu that the husband is refusing to basically accept to take the mahar back and bring a resolution to this marriage. Okay, that's number one. So the qadi is a key figure if the husband is not accepting. Okay, now the other thing is that the khula should be for something rather, let's just at least call it considerable. For example, even though she does have the right to raise the situation to the qadi and keep her mahar and keep her financial rights, but prove harm. But guess what? This is a process and can take some time to prove that some of the harm, for example, number one, perhaps something that relates to his deed. He's not praying. He smokes. He's a liar. Okay, so that's something related to his deed. Number two, related to his nafs. His nafs, perhaps maybe, he has a problem with his health. He basically has high cholesterol that's affecting his, of course, let's say, a dysfunction, you know what I'm talking about. And in that situation, she basically said, his health, he's diabetic, he's got heart problems, he's got cholesterol problems. All of these different things do affect basically, the sexual function. In that situation, she's basically asking for a divorce. Right now, of course, they do have different medications for that. So definitely, you can probably see urologists, and there are different doctors that can actually help in resolving this problem. So just to let you know, right now medicine does actually have a lot of solutions in regards to that. If we're talking about that, but let's just say she said, no, there's actually something else that happens. He's always weak. He's always tired. It's too much for me to handle. I'm basically here just being a nurse. I cannot handle being a nurse and a wife and taking care of the kids. It's just too much for me. I myself am sick and I have these problems and I can't handle this. We'll say, okay, fair enough. I mean, she doesn't want to handle it. Then in that situation, the qadi will ask for the proper documentation, maybe two doctors' reports, not one, but two doctors' reports. And the qadi might even order that he would get a screening done in order to basically confirm that this is true. Let's say the husband says, but that's not true. I'm actually doing everything. She's exaggerating. That's not actually true. But then the qadi might say, okay, fair enough. You can say that, but guess what? I need a doctor's report to basically to testify. I need two doctors' reports to basically tell me whether you are capable of doing these things or whether you're not capable of doing these things. Number three, mental health. Let's say she is proving that he is schizophrenic or he is bipolar or he has severe OCD or whatever it is. Then in that situation, she can basically report it to the qadi, and the qadi will ask for an assessment by two psychiatrists or two psychologists, and then they'll basically say, yes, here's a report, and this is what we're seeing. Number four, we're talking about sexual issues. Basically erectile dysfunction, or perhaps maybe issues that have severe infection or whatever it is that's basically affecting him. No cure. Doctors are saying that a cure is basically impossible, or at least this is a chronic illness. So in that situation, the qadi can say, sorry, but she has the right to ask for a divorce, and the qadi is basically going to intervene and bring a marriage resolution in that situation. Number five basically has or you know what, let me talk about the other part since we're speaking about the fourth one, which is the sexual part. If let's say he wasn't intimate with her for 4 months and above, or perhaps needed more than that, then in that situation, she can raise it to the qadi and then dispute this. Is it true, or is she making it up? And the qadi will say, well, you need to be intimate because she is afraid of her for herself. And in that situation, of course, the qadi can force him. I don't know how, but can force him at the end of the day and tell him, well, if you're not giving her her rights in intimacy, then in that situation, the qadi will intervene and basically bring a resolution to this relationship. Now, so the fifth one is basically the financial part. So she can raise it and say he's not paying enough, or at least he's being too stingy, he's being too greedy, etc. Then the qadi will say, okay, how much money are you making? And perhaps the qadi may sometimes give an order and say, this is the amount of money that I want you to give your wife in order to spend, let's say, on the household or whatever, or probably ask for bank statements to see how much money was spent on groceries, how much money was spent on gas, how much money was spent on perhaps maybe rent or whatever it is, and how and basically this is going to reflect, that bank statement is going to reflect a lot about really how much money is spent on the household, and is it fair for a family of, let's say, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever the number is. Then certainly the qadi has and is supposed to have the power to basically have all of this information disclosed in order to make the fair and the right and certainly the right hukum, or the right judgment in this situation. And of course, the wife would basically have to say the reason if she's asking khulu, she would have to say the reason. So why are you actually why are you asking for this marriage resolution? So she would have to provide certain information in order to make sure that this was done not as an impulsive reaction to something, and that perhaps there is a way to get the things in place. So she would have to mention certain reasons, and the qadi will look into these reasons. And this happens a lot, that a wife might actually come forward and say, well, he's actually telling me that he wants to get married to a second wife. Is this a valid reason? Or is this not a valid reason? The qadi will be the one to evaluate and basically weigh the situation to see whether this is a valid reason or whether it isn't a valid reason. Does culture play a role in what decision and what the qadi will see? The answer is absolutely. Just like any other human being, and even in secular courts, you can have the jury, you can have the qadi also get influenced by perhaps maybe his own discrimination, his own misogyny, the list goes on, and what affects the qadi's decisions. And this can happen even with a Muslim qadi. He can be, certainly, maybe he is misogynist, maybe he has his views, maybe he has his wisdom, maybe he has, certain mistakes that he might commit. Yes, certainly. But the qadi is acting on behalf of the government, or is acting on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this situation. So you cannot basically just reject what the qadi had said because of you disliking and you thinking that, oh, he was just not being fair because he was just being a misogynist, because he has personal relations with my husband or whatever it is, he wasn't fair, etc. Once the qadi has said his statement, he listened to all the way through all of this, you accepted from the beginning that you're going to go to this qadi. Now this becomes imperative upon you to accept it. Not after the statement and after the rule was done that you would say, well, no, here's my objection, is that he was a misogynist or he was this, and you can appeal. You can appeal and say, here's where I think you needed to basically, focus on, and this is where I think that was wrong in, and you can make an appeal. But it would still have to be in effect, basically because the qadi listened, studied the situation, and then you can, let's say she says, because I cannot handle, he wants to get married to a second wife. The qadi said, you know what? Okay, I understand that right now you're pretty angry that your husband is getting a second wife. I understand you're pretty angry about that, but I'm not going to validate the khulu. But I'm going to give him back his mahar. No, I want to give him back his mahar, and I want to bring this to an end. The qadi might say, I'm sorry, come back to me. And let's say after he gets married, whether you're going to be capable of handling it or not. But if the second marriage brings harm to you, then the qadi will say, can you prove the harm? Oh, he is he's always coming in angry because he's just not working out in the second household and it's affecting me. He's always being so angry, he's always being so impulsive. The situation is becoming unbearable, the drama is just impossible, etc. Even though she can be a problem, she can be the one to probably cause this drama or whatever, but at the end of the day, she has the right to say, I couldn't handle the drama. This is too much anxiety. This is too much friction. This is it's affecting me, and look at, it's affecting my blood pressure. It's affecting me mentally. It's affecting. Then in that situation, she will make an appeal in that situation and say, see, I'm not being impulsive here. I actually have my evidence. this is causing me to basically be heartbroken, to basically be hurt. And here is the not only one therapist, but I'll give you two reports from two different therapists that basically would testify to this and basically report that I need to exit and it's affecting me mentally, it's affecting me psychologically, it's affecting me this. So in that situation, the Qadi will look into the report. Does the Qadi have to accept the report? No, he does not. The Qadi does not have to accept the report. Just to keep that in mind, the Qadi can evaluate the situation and basically say, sorry, reason rejected or reason accepted, or then basically look into the situation and then in that situation basically make the final judgment. Okay, now scholars also had differences of opinions on whether this is talaq or whether this is fasq. Stop right here. This is a key word, and the implication upon this significant wording right there actually has a huge difference in the root. Let me explain. If we called this a talaq, that would mean that one, she would have to wait 3 waiting periods before she would actually have the right to remarry or have the right to basically move on with her life and etc. There would be 3 waiting periods. And if we call this a talaq, then it would be limited with the number of then 3 times of talaq. Remember, the talaq is 3 times only. 3, if we call this a talaq, then in that situation, it would basically mean that it would fall into the category of certain financial responsibilities he would be responsible for. Now, the second description, if we called it a fasq, that would mean that one, certainly, well, the Qadi was the one to evaluate the reasoning, and he basically determined that was going to be fasq. Okay, now the Qadi's involved. Number 2, there would be 1 waiting period. Number 3 is that there is no limit to the number of how many khulu'as can be done. So what does that look like? So let's say they do a khulu' and then they come back to each other again. And then they do a khulu' again. And then did a khulu' again. 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times. Every single time she gets angry, you know what, here's your mahar. And then they basically go back to each other again with a marriage contract. Is there supposed to be a new marriage contract? That's another debate. Okay, if they want to come back to it, can they come back to each other even after 3 times, or what does that look like? Is that considered? If you say that this was part of talaq, then after 3 times she would have to get married to a new guy if without prior agreement, and if he divorces, that's when you can come back. But if you call this fasq, there is no limit to the number of khulu'as done. They can come back and basically and there is no limit, and basically come back again and do it again and all of that. And I don't know why, but all right, but just to let you know, the debate between scholars. Now, I actually wanted to get into this one, and let's see, where is it? Oh dear. Hold on. Okay, here we go. What I wanted to get to was this one. Okay, it's a very good website. I tried to actually search for a good book, and I saw basically it searched a number of different books, and to be honest, I think this was the best article written. And you might say, well, we don't have it in English. And I'll tell you, it's really easy to get it into English. I'm going to basically put it for you right there. And I'll show you how to do this into English. Okay, so this is basically aluka.net, a very, very good website, very, very good website, and basically has a number of different articles. And you could see this scholar right there basically did this good article where he basically summarized it. And certainly you can go to these three dots right there and you can do translate. And I don't know if you could see what I'm doing, but you can do translate. And basically, let's see, choose another language. We're gonna do translate into English, or let's see, right there, I'm gonna translate it into English, and or even any other language that you would want. You see it? And you got it into English. Pretty easy. All right. But I'm not gonna do the English piece of it. Okay, I'm gonna take it back to the original. Because we need to see some of those texts, and I'll explain the rest. Okay, let's see. Hold on, let me get that. Okay, here we go. We reset everything back. Okay, let's see. Now, a number of different things. When we're speaking about khulu itself and that debate between whether it is whether it is fasq or whether it is considered part of the talaq, that was that huge debate between scholars. Okay, so let me right there just, is that the article that I wanted? Hold on. Is that the article that I wanted? Hold on. Something's wrong. Okay, yes, it is. It is. It's the article that I wanted. Okay, here we go. So the scholars had differences of opinions, like I said, whether that is fasq or whether that is talaq. So we're just going to at least clarify that one. So the first opinion basically said it was talqa ba'ina, meaning that it is an irrevocable talaq. That was, even the scholars that said that that was talaq, they said it was irrevocable. Okay, so when you say irrevocable, what does that mean? Well, that would mean even though we said that there's a waiting period, there's no question that there's a waiting period. But they debated whether it was one menstrual cycle or whether it was three. That's what they debated. But they never said that there was no waiting period. There's no such thing as a woman being intimate and no waiting period being there. Why? Because paternity, and speaking of paternity, that is a sacred right. The child's paternity is a sacred right and is not whatsoever something that is on a side. It's a sacred right. And let's see. So that al-khulu' basically is considered as an irrevocable, meaning a minor irrevocable or a major irrevocable, a minor irrevocable one, as if this was the first one, and it would be considered as part of the talaq times. But let's say this was the third one, not the third khulu', but they had already done two talaqs, and then the final one, she was like, you know what, I'm done with this. And she went and applied for khulu'. That would be considered talqa 3 according to these scholars. Okay. And of course, that would be irrevocable. So what does it mean that it's irrevocable? It means that he cannot do what we would do in a revocable divorce during the waiting period. During the waiting period, he would have the right to say, you know, we're coming back. I'm bringing her back without her consent. But in khulu', even during this waiting period, he cannot say, I'm bringing you back, even though she's on her waiting period, unless she consents. You see the difference? In a revocable divorce, during the waiting period, her consent does not matter. In a khulu', during the waiting period, her consent matters. Key difference. Her consent matters during the waiting period in al-khulu'. Okay, so that would basically be a key thing. And that's basically the majority of what the Malikis, Hanafis, Shafi'is, basically, and Hanbalis, they basically had considered. I don't know why he would say the Maliki first. He was supposed to say Hanafi, Maliki, but Shafi'i, etc. All right, now, What is their evidence? So their evidence on this is that the Prophet ﷺ had told, remember Thabit ibn Qais, he said, اقبل الحديقة. There is a narration that he said, وطلقها تطليقة. In another narration, وفارقها. So the wording is also one of the reasons why they debated. Because he said اقبل الحديقة, I said accept that garden, which basically you had given to her as a mahar, and now he said طلقها تطليقة in this narration. You're going to basically give her a divorce. So the scholars that depended on this narration, they said, here's the word, طلقها تطليقة. Said one. Then therefore it would be considered as one of the talaq numbers that we had talked about before. They said if he did not have the power to basically consider it as talaq, then why would the Prophet ﷺ even use that word? And of course, the husband does not have the ability to separate without divorce. So therefore, in that situation, of course, the compensation is given to him, and the Prophet ﷺ was the one to tell him, طلقها تطليقة. He wouldn't have ordered using the word talaq unless it's actually a valid talaq, and therefore it would be considered. Let's see. The second opinion basically said that this is a fasq. A fasq basically means making a resolution. Okay? They said, well, in that situation, that would only be unless he has the intention to make it as a talaq. That's what would make a difference. But if he didn't have the intention to make it as talaq, then that would be fasq. Okay, and that's what Shafi'i had said, and al-Hanabila had said all as well, and Ibn Taymiyyah. Well, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim both were actually Hanbali. Ibn Kathir was actually Shafi'i. Okay, all right, let's see. And so, like we said before, what does that mean? Well, does he have the right to bring her back? What does that mean as well? So, il-khulu' also means not only the mahar, but she would also waive her financial rights in terms of nafaqa, in terms of maintenance, probably paying for rent and probably paying for food and groceries and maybe health insurance and all of that. She basically had chosen to waive it. Okay, she had chosen to waive it. So of course, in that situation, of course, you can see the debate. And what is the evidence? This area is probably the key evidence right there for both sides. I want you to kind of just listen to this one. How can one area be the key evidence to both opinions, basically? Let's look at this area. الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيما حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به تلك حدود الله فلا تعتدوها ومن يتعد حدود الله فأولئك هم الظالمون فإن طلقها فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره فإن طلقها فلا جناح عليهما أن يتراجعا إن ظن أن يقيما حدود الله وتلك حدود الله and يبينها لقوم يعلمون. Now, when you look at this area right there, the talaq is 2 times. You either hold in kindness and good, or you let go in basically in good terms. And you do not have the right to take any of what you had given them in terms of mahr, unless you fear that they would not basically be living up to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you fear that they would not be capable of living up to the principles, then in that situation, of course, there is no sin upon her to basically compensate and pay what I want you to look at this word, because the word iftadat bih actually means a ransom. actually means a ransom. Al-fidya means a ransom. When do you pay a ransom? That's when you take a hostage. Okay? When you take a hostage, you basically pay a ransom to free the hostage. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, on the day of Hujjat al-Wada'. What did he say? He basically said in the hadith that فَإِنَّهُنَّ عَوَانٌ عِنْدَكُمْ, said that they were awa. What is al-ani? Al-ani is basically a hostage. Said that they were hostages in your homes. So with the ayah is basically saying, well, she can pay this ransom or compensate basically what you had given to her as in mahr. Then in that situation, tilka hududullah, those are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you should not exceed the limit. And whoever exceeds the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Is this talking to the wife or talking to the husband? Basically talking to both. Because marriage is sacred. Marriage is sacred. You don't just exit the marriage just for no good reason. And that's the same thing. You don't pressure the wife to ransom or even compensate and give up on her financial rights because she couldn't handle you anymore. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling that person a zalim because you had chosen to pressure her in order for her to compensate and just give away on her financial rights because she couldn't handle you anymore. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them الظالمون. فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا, if he basically divorces her, then she cannot come back to him unless she marries another man without prior agreement, that is. And if فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَن يَتَرَاجَعَا, then if he divorces her, that is the second husband, if they thought that they would be capable of giving and living back together and living up to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it would be permissible for them to come back to each other. Those are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, clarifying it for people that basically want to learn. And this is extremely important just to keep in mind. Now, how did the two opinions have conflicting opinions? One said it's talaq and the other one said it's fasq, even though it's one ayah. So the one that actually said that this proves that this is different than talaq, fasq, that was Ibn Abdullah ibn Abbas. And he said, okay, so the ayah says at-talaqu marratan, but then it basically lets us know that there is an exception to this, and he saw it as this is giving me another route. And he said, فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا فِيمَا افْتَدَتْ بِهِ. The first opinion that said that no, this is part of talaq, they said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at-talaqu marratan, and he's basically listing the different types of talaq. There's the first type of talaq, him announcing talaq, and the second type is basically them agreeing on a resolution. So that was that debate between them. The second thing, they said, we've got another opinion, we've got another evidence. Rubayya bint Muawwidh, she basically had seek to do khulur during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ orders her to basically do one iddah. What does that mean? One haida, one menstrual cycle. And they said, here's our evidence. We've got that she was ordered to do one menstrual cycle, and you could see this is narrated by Tirmidhi, and he said that that was basically authentic as well. And certainly Ibn Abdul Barr also said that this was basically authentic, or Ibn Abdul Barr, he basically, well, you could say هذا باب لم يصح فيه شيء. Okay, so you've got some other scholars basically debating whether this was necessarily authentic. So you have Ibn al-Arabi basically say, well, there's no evidence to prove whether authentic evidence, whether it is one cycle or whether it's 3 cycles, but for sure, one shifting evidence, let's say a key evidence that would basically make as the center evidence to prove either opinion. So let's see, Ibn al-Qayyim, he basically said, well, in his I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, he said, we do have a number of different chain of narrations that basically prove that this hadith is actually authentic. Now you could see the scholars debating on the authenticity of this hadith itself, whether she is basically, or a woman that had done khulu', of course, the husband cannot reverse this without her consent. This isn't like a divorce. A divorce, her consent does not matter. In a khulu', her consent is key. Her consent is key. She initiated the khulu', then you can't just say, okay, thanks for the money. Now I want to bring you back. Excuse me, sir? You don't have the power to do that. That's it. Now it's her consent. Then she can decide whether she does want to come back or not. So how long is this iddah? The iddah, or the waiting period, is basically 1 cycle according to this hadith. And you had another hadith that basically said something else. So the scholars that considered it, a fasq, they said she's only doing 1 cycle. Then that's not like talaq. That's different. The scholars that said it was talaq, they said regardless, it's just a different kind of talaq. There it is, she's doing a iddah. It's just a different kind of talaq, and not necessarily considered as a fasq that is outside of the numbers that we basically had said in terms of talaq, that it would be within the numbers. But khulu' would basically be unlimited. And let's see, al-Khattabi, one of the greatest scholars that basically did for Sunan Abi Dawood, he basically did a beautiful chapter. It says in like 5 volumes. And he said, هذا أدل شيء على أن الخلوع فسخ وليس بطلاق. He said, this is the biggest evidence, which is that she would only do a waiting period of 1 cycle. He said, that's the biggest evidence that this is fasakh and not a talaq. Let's see right there. And the third evidence that they debated, and both sides used the same evidence, but just to let you know, that remember the story about Imra'a Thabit ibn Qais Fatima, that she basically came and the Prophet ﷺ basically told him فردت عليه وأمره ففارقها. They basically was ordered to basically leave her. Let's look at this one, number 8. So this hadith is actually in Sahih al-Bukhari right there. You just saw it. Okay, so what's the evidence? They said, well, the Prophet ﷺ said فَفَارِقْهَا. He didn't say فَطَلِّقْهَا, even though there's another narration that basically said طَلِّقْهَا. Okay, and of course, you could say in this narration, he didn't say طَلِّقْهَا, he said فَارِقْهَا. Okay, so just to let you see all of that, and I'm going to skip, I could see people are losing patience with the evidences, but at least we see these evidences. And certainly the main fruit of all of this is really to see that talaq, that if we are to say talaq or we are to say fasq, we needed to see the implication of all of that. And in order to basically understand it, we needed to see those evidences. And certainly, talaq would be with the husband himself actually initiating the talaq, and it would be his option. It would be him consenting to this. But il-fasq would be, well, he doesn't have to consent to it. And he basically is not the one that initiated it. So, of course, this the preponderant, wallahu alam, it is that it is fasq and not talaq. It is fasq and not talaq, wallahu alam. And certainly, in situations like that, of course, remember some of the things that would be, let's say, qualify to bring il-fasq for this basically this marriage relationship is number one, if both of the husband and wife were basically not equivalent to one another. Let's say in practice, she discovered that she's way more educated than he was. She was really surprised to how ignorant he was, let's just say. Or she basically had felt that, they're not compatible anymore, etc. Then in that situation, she could basically bring that up. And number two, if any of them would basically leave Islam and they did not come back to it. And number three, if one of them becomes Muslim and the other one refused to become Muslim, then in that situation, that would bring an end to the marriage contract that was already there. And of course, during li'an, what is it li'an? Li'an is that he accused her of cheating. And in that situation, we're speaking about cheating, meaning being intimate with somebody else. That's a li'an right there. Okay. And the other one is saru zawj. If she was capable of bringing evidence that he basically is too poor, is unemployed, and that she cannot live in that situation, and he's incapable of basically paying for the different expenses at home, then in that situation, she can ask to divorce due to harm, or perhaps maybe certain deformities. So we're talking about perhaps maybe he has a certain illness that's causing an erectile dysfunction, or she basically has some kind of an illness right there that is making them perhaps maybe disgusted or not incapable of or incompetent to basically living together as married couple. Then in that situation, of course, if we are to say that this was fasq, then certainly he does not have the power to bring back the wife. And in khulu, he does not have the power to bring her back unless she gives a new consent and a new marriage contract. So just keep that one in mind. And certainly, just seeing this debate right there. And yes, so I'm just going to let you see right there. As for the idda for al-khulu, the preponderant is that it is basically one cycle, in which you could see in that hadith of Rubai' bint Muawwidh, in what she had basically said, which right there, Rubai' bint Muawwidh hadith, and the Prophet ﷺ ordered her um, to basically just do one cycle. And then after that, she would basically be capable of getting married. Okay, so this is the end for today, inshallah. I know we started out late, but thought it would be good to just give it 1 hour. Okay, was it 1 hour or was it less? Because I could see people, this is a very dense topic. So inshallah we'll basically going in more details about other situations. Okay. And inshallah, the day after tomorrow, we'll be discussing nafaqa, mahr, and I don't know if we'll be discussing li'an, because li'an that's supposed to be in the criminal law, or is this supposed to be in family law? So we'll be talking about li'an, we'll be talking about dhihar as well. It's not going to be a lot to talk about, but just a couple slides really. Li'an, dhihar, and nafaqa. We'll also be talking about the basically the alimony, and inshallah we'll do that the day after tomorrow. So for now, if there are any questions, go ahead, my friends. No questions? Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop the live stream and basically